head was just exploding. I mean, she was 9. Managing sounds like way too high a bar. That one was a little bit tricky. I thought this was supposed to be the most amazing time. Got to the point, so yeah, the 2 days he didn't breastfeed, he didn't latch at all. And then and he was just crying the whole time because he was obviously hungry. And then when I got home, the midwife came on the 3rd day after he'd been born, and she was like, your milk hasn't come in, which is quite a bit of a concern. And she was trying to get him to latch, and she said, look, I think that we need to supplement with some formula, because we didn't realize, but by the 3rd day he was so quiet, and we're like, oh, he's sleeping so much, he's just a really quiet baby. And she's like, he's lethargic and he's lost weight, like more weight than he should have lost, and yeah, he needs to get some food, that's why he's so quiet. And so she just said, let's just supplement with some formula, and to stimulate your milk because he's not latching, let's get a pump. So she was really helpful. So then I got a breast pump and we supplemented with formula. I was so reluctant to do that though, because I just had that messaging in my head about like breast is best, and no, I've got to breastfeed, and if I give him formula then he's only going to want formula. Like my head was just exploding to get him latched. For at least the first couple of weeks it was a struggle. It's the point where I ended up like pulling a nerve in my neck because I was like craning my head down so much to try and like get him to latch. And I was like, obviously the way I was holding him too, I was so tense, and I ended up pulling this muscle in my neck, and it was so painful. So I was in so much pain, and then trying to hold him and breastfeed, and I couldn't sleep. It was just, oh my gosh, it was the worst. It was so bad. I did not enjoy that at all. And it was so weird because I was like, I thought this was supposed to be the most amazing time, and you know, everything was supposed to be so natural, and I was supposed to be feeling so much love for my child and so much, you know, wonder at the human body. And honestly, I was just feeling so miserable.
Yeah. And how long did it take for you to heal from the, the birth?
Yes. So I had quite a protracted healing, I would say, from my birth, even though technically it was like a relatively uncomplicated birth. Although I did have the episiotomy, I still had bruising on my stomach from where the doctor had been pushing to get him out. So I had pain there. But yeah, in terms of my pelvic floor, I was in a lot of pain, and I was also having other symptoms that I wasn't aware could happen. So I would say even until 3 months later, I was not fully recovered, and I went to my doctor to say, like, I feel like something's wrong.
You had pain, or?
I had pain, and I had like other more embarrassing symptoms that when I was asking other women, you know, who had given birth, whether they were having something similar, and they were telling me, no, that's no. And kind of looking at me a bit shocked that I knew something was wrong. I also did go back to the hospital where I gave birth because my midwife suggested that maybe she had also looked at my stitches and felt that a doctor should have a look at what was going on because it didn't look very standard to her. And so I did go back to the hospital where I gave birth. It was actually ironically on International Women's Day. I just remember thinking how ironic it was. So because I went to the hospital, to the ward where I gave birth, just to say like, can I get this assessed? Because I've got some pretty serious symptoms happening and pain. And they told me that I needed to go wait at emergency to be seen by the doctor. So then I waited at emergency for, I think it was like 4 hours, maybe over 4 hours. And I finally saw a doctor. And before they even did an assessment or anything like that, they just spoke to me, and they just said that, yeah, they wouldn't look, and if I wanted to, that I needed to book an appointment at the clinic to have an assessment. And yeah,
that's after 4 hours of wait.
Yeah. So my sort of healing was much longer, I think, than for what most people would experience. Yeah, so it wasn't until 6 months later that I felt like things were, you know, back to normal. But by that stage, I had then, like, I'd gone to a specialist hospital for pelvic floor health called the Beckenbodenzentrum, which they have in different locations in Germany. And by then I had been diagnosed with third-degree tearing. They obviously had a look at the things and diagnosed me with third-degree tearing. And then the gynaecologist was so lovely, and she was like the first, you know, doctor I had after giving birth who was actually really empathetic and actually like validated my concerns. I felt like everybody before that was just dismissing me without even doing an assessment, without even looking, but they would just be, I don't know if it had anything to do with it, but I think because even though I turned up and like from the outside, maybe I looked okay, but obviously I was falling apart inside. But yeah, she was really great. And so she diagnosed me with this tear and told me, look, you should have had an operation to fix this. You should have been diagnosed at the hospital, you know, after you gave birth, but you haven't been. So we could either do the surgery now, or you can try and do physical therapy, pelvic floor therapy and a hormone treatment, which will speed up the healing, and we can see if we can try and avoid surgery, which I wanted to do, because if you're breastfeeding, to have the surgery, you need to be under general anesthetic, and then you would have to stop breastfeeding. Exactly. Yeah, while that happens. So yeah, I started physical therapy pretty soon after that, and then the hormone treatment as well. And I did that. Yeah, I did that for like 6 months once I was diagnosed, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 3 months postpartum. Yeah. So it took me quite a while to get back to where I needed to be and like to mentally feel better, because then also I just started really distrusting doctors.
Second pregnancy.
With my second pregnancy, it was very similar to my first, thankfully, and I didn't have any, you know, complications, but I definitely struggled with being pregnant. Like I just didn't enjoy the experience. It just wasn't something that I enjoyed. I know some women say that it's like the most amazing experience, but so the second pregnancy I just felt gross, like I did the first time.
The whole period, whole 9 months?
Yeah, the whole 9 months. And obviously my morning sickness, I had it worse with my second pregnancy with my daughter Nia. So that was something I struggled with, and work was really busy. So it was just, and having a toddler as well, you can't really, there's not as much, you know, space to rest. So I did struggle with that. And then also being the lockdown here in Germany, you know, nothing's open, and the Kita, so the childcare centres are like open for a bit and then closed. And then, so every week is a struggle anyway. But then being pregnant, it wasn't the best time of my life, but I was just glad that every time I went for a scan and that everything was okay with my baby. And in terms of endometriosis, so we conceived a few months after we started trying, so the endometriosis didn't seem to affect my fertility in any way. But with endometriosis, with my first child, as soon as I had stopped, no, actually about 6 months after I had him, my periods came back, and so I had all the bad pain again. And I also get really bad bloating with endometriosis as well. So I had all of that until I was pregnant with the second child again, and then the pain went. And then obviously the bloating, I didn't have that pain, but my stomach was getting bigger because I was pregnant. So in that way, it was kind of a relief to be pregnant, because when I'm pregnant, I don't have all that pain that I do have. But endometriosis never goes away. So as soon as my periods come back, then
the pain
comes back. And my second pregnancy was planned as well. And I was anxious, but I'm a worrier. I'm a bit of an anxious person anyway, but I think the sort of pregnancy hormones, as soon as I was pregnant again, even though I had done it before, I was worried, but I was worried about the health of my unborn child, of course, and thankful that I live in a country where, you know, the cost of healthcare is not a concern. So I could make sure I could go to my regular checks and make sure everything was okay. But I was like way more worried about giving birth, just based on my experience with my first birth and how long that took to recover from. Yeah, that was something that really worried me the second time around. And that's why, in part, why I decided to have a C-section, a planned C-section with my second birth, which is like another thing that I just never thought I would do. You know, I thought I was going to love breastfeeding and be such an advocate for every woman to breastfeed, and I thought I was going to have natural pain-free, medication-free births. But yeah, with my second pregnancy, I again realized that like all the things I had thought prior to having children didn't necessarily apply to me. So I decided to, book in to have a C-section this time around.
How did you go with your gynecologist? Did you have to do any convincing, or was it easy? Because I know that in Germany, you know, they push to more like natural birth, and you have to convince, or maybe your gynecologist was understanding.
I found it so interesting with my gynecologist, who's really lovely, but when I spoke to her about, look, based on the situation, you know, my recovery with my first birth, I'm thinking that maybe it might be better for me to have a C-section because I don't want to do any more damage to my pelvic floor. And I just found, you know, she just was basically like, you might feel different by the time that you are by the time your due date nears. And she was a bit dismissive. She was just sort of like, and it probably won't make any difference. It's just about what you want. I mean, she was nice, don't get me wrong, but yeah, I just felt like there wasn't really a discussion based on what had happened last time. So I called the Beckenbodenzentrum, and I thought I would sort of speak with them to see what they would advise, because they were the ones who had diagnosed me with the tearing and they had treated me for that. And thankfully they came back to me and they just said, they gave me a full assessment based on my previous diagnosis, and said that they would recommend that I have a C-section. And also, I mean, it did end up that my daughter, because my son was 3.6 kilos and they thought that my daughter might be bigger than him, about 3.8 kilos. And so they said, like, based on her sort of projected size, that, yeah, it might be better. And your size and like your pelvic, you know, width and everything, that it might be better for you to have a C-section. So they gave me a referral to go to the hospital to have a C-section, which I did need, because when I went to the hospital without the referral, because I thought they would just be happy with me telling them what the Beckenbodenzentrum had sort of said to me about getting a C-section. The doctor I spoke with at the hospital was really like horrible, in the sense that she just said to me, she didn't want to see my medical history, like the tearing and the treatment that I'd undergone or anything like that. And she just told me that if I got a C-section, it would be completely elective and that it wouldn't be covered by insurance.
But I can't believe, like, you cannot just come to the hospital and say, I want a C-section.
You can't, and it's so conflicting. I mean, this is just another one of the eye-opening experiences that you have when you are pregnant, and if you give birth. But the idea that, like, a woman can choose how she gives birth, and it's like a rumor as far as I'm concerned, because really there is such a push against, I felt anyway, there's such a push against elective C-sections, regardless of the reasons. If it's not an emergency or like deemed medically necessary, then I just felt like the hospitals don't really want to sort of grant you that wish if you just want to have a C-section for whatever your reasons are, and it's not an emergency C-section or deemed medically necessary by a doctor. So the conversation I had when I went to register at the hospital for my second birth was quite infuriating, because I didn't come with a referral. I came with the advice of the hospital where I had been diagnosed with my pelvic floor issues, which was that I have a C-section. And yeah, the doctor didn't want to know about my medical history and didn't really care what the hospital had to say, and was trying to push me to have a vaginal birth. And so then I said, well, do you want me to come back with a referral from the hospital? So this slip that, you know, is an official referral, and then a report from the hospital about my medical diagnosis. She didn't care about the medical report. She just said, yes, come back with the referral, and then we'll consider scheduling you for a C-section. Yeah. A doctor has to say it's medically necessary for it to be covered under the public health system.
Mm-hmm. How did they decide on the date of C-section?
They usually schedule the C-section, I was told, around a week before, if there's no sort of pressing issues. So a week before your due date. They wouldn't do it any earlier than that. And so for me, they scheduled it a week before my due date. And if I was to go into labour early, then obviously I would go to the hospital and I would have the C-section as long as things hadn't progressed too far.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was scheduled to have my C-section on a Monday morning, early on a Monday morning. And so thankfully we had enough time. We could take my son to childcare that morning. It was such a surreal idea that it's like you say goodbye to your firstborn child, and then you're like, oh, next time I see you, I'll have a sibling. You'll have a sibling in a few hours. So we said goodbye to him, and then we went to the hospital and we met the midwife who was assigned to us, and she prepared us for the surgery. So we got into the surgical outfits, so the surgical gown that I needed to wear, and then my husband obviously had to be in the surgical scrubs so he could be in the room with me. So it was during Corona times, which meant that he had to leave a few hours after the baby we were told, after the baby was born. And also I couldn't have any visitors on the ward. Oh. But it wasn't great, but at the same time, at least he was able to come for the surgery and the birth, which I was really thankful for. So we waited in a room for, I think, maybe an hour and a half before our surgery because they were running a little bit late. But everyone was really nice and really reassuring. And so I got wheeled into the ward first, into the surgical room where the surgery was going to be completed, and I was given the spinal anaesthetic. That one was a little bit tricky. It took them about 6 goes to get the needle placement in my spine correct. Oh. And I hate needles.
Did you feel it?
I felt it. I mean, it wasn't really painful. It just felt like a little sort of bee sting, I guess, every time that they did it. And I felt so bad for the anaesthetist. I mean, I was terrified, and all I could think, I was just trying to think, look, because I hate needles, and the idea of being awake during surgery, I mean, that's just terrifying. But all I was thinking was as long as my baby is fine, I was just trying to focus on that, as long as my baby's fine. Yes, she's missed my spine and this really hurts, and oh my gosh, I'm having a needle shoved in my back and I'm about to be cut open. But anyway, she ended up getting one of her more senior anaesthetist colleagues to come, and she came and got the needle placement correctly. I felt the young anaesthetist though, you could just tell because they were already running a bit late because the prior surgery had just gone a bit longer. And they were all just looking at her. Everyone's just waiting for her to get the placement right, and she kept trying to do. She's like, oh, and she's like, now can you can you still feel your legs? And I was like, yes, I can still feel everything. And you could just feel her sweating. And she was like, just relax. And she was getting stressed in her voice. I found that really hilarious that she's telling you, she's like, just relax. You're like, I can't relax right now. But anyway, the more senior anaesthetist ended up getting the spot right. And again, everyone was really lovely and super reassuring. So once that was done and the placement was correct, then my husband could come in and the surgery could start, which was just crazy. Yeah. But no, everything went, it was all fine. The surgeon, they tell you, thankfully there's a sheet up so you can't see, because I really didn't want to see them cutting me open. But yeah, the surgeon sort of tells you, okay, I'm going to do the incision now, and then, you know, so she did the incision. It's pretty quick, and she pulled Nia out, and I heard her crying, and she cried. So I was happy, because I was like, okay, it means that like she's breathing, she's okay, because of course, you know, like it's surgery and things can go wrong. And yes, they showed Nia to us, and that was really, really beautiful. I was like, oh, it was super nice. And then they took her away, just took her around the corner to do the Apgar test that they do to check their, you know, their heart rate and things like that, just to make sure the baby's okay. And then they brought her back pretty quickly and placed her on my chest, which was super nice. And yeah, then wheeled us into the recovery room, and Matt and I were in there. And obviously after they stitch you up while, like, I was holding her, but then they take you to the recovery room, and Matt and I were in there for a few hours, just, you know, cuddling her and like getting her dressed. And yeah. And she latched straight away. That was what was crazy to me. Like, I put her on my breast straight away. It's just, that's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing. And how long did it take after the C-section to, what are the differences between the natural birth and then C-section in terms of the first few days?
Yeah, I think for me, because obviously it's different for everyone, but I found for the C-section, definitely I had more pain on the second day after. So once the pain medication had worn off, then by the second day I had more pain, and like, just I was sitting in the bed. I hadn't moved from the bed by that stage, because, you know, they tell you not to sort of get up and walk around, because they don't want you carrying the baby and falling over after you've had this surgery. So the midwives were coming in and helping to change the baby's nappy and everything, because I couldn't have my husband there because of coronavirus. So they really had to help with the baby if I needed any help picking the baby up and things like that. And yeah, the second day I had a lot of pain.
Where the cut?
It was where the incision was. It was like, it felt like a burning pain. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, when the pain medication had worn off. And I mean, in Germany, they're pretty like light-handed with the pain medication, which in a way is a good thing, because I think it means that your body doesn't take as long to recover, because you sort of, I guess you're not like, if you have too much pain medication, you could be moving around too much and you don't realize that you're like, actually sort of
should take it easy.
Exactly, that you should take it easy. So I just took it really easy. And
so you didn't have any painkillers?
I had Panadol and ibuprofen. Yeah.
Did it help?
It helped a little bit, not a lot though. Yeah, so the second day I was definitely in a lot of pain at the incision site. And then by the third day, I like was up and walking around, and still had that sort of burning pain where the incision was. But from everything I had read online, and then also the advice that I had from the midwives, was that like I should try and just start walking around a little bit.
When did you start first?
I think I started walking on the second day, because I had the catheter removed then, so that I could get out of bed. Yeah, so I started walking on the second day, and just a little bit, like just to the baby change table and to like the bathroom. And I think I don't think I walked down the hallway then. Then by the third day, I started just taking Nia in her bassinet and wheeling her down the hallway just so I could walk a little bit. So definitely, yeah, I'm going to say the first 3 days, it was quite painful. But then once I got over that part, I actually found the recovery, for me anyway, a lot better than my first birth, which was really interesting.
Did you have any baby blues the first time or the second time? Or any form of postpartum depression? Did you notice anything?
I mean, I don't think so, thankfully. I mean, definitely it wasn't like a beautiful fairy tale, but I think because my expectations were a bit lower this time around for the second time. And, you know, my husband was home, and so I had lots of support from him when I got home. And our child's in childcare, so our first child is in childcare, so he was out of the house for most of the day anyway. So yeah, we didn't have family here, which is hard. But no, I think in terms of postpartum depression, I was okay. But definitely, like, I mean, because she's still 3 months now, she's still quite young, I still have my moments where I'm just so tired and exhausted. So I'm not like walking on clouds all the time, but still somehow coping, I would say. Not managing, let's just say coping. Managing sounds like way too high a bar. Yeah.
Right. Based on these two experiences, what would you recommend other moms to be?
Yeah, that's such a hard
What are
one.
some must-knows? What are some of the things that you had no idea about, although you read about, you talked to others? What are some things that surprised you maybe that you didn't expect it to be?
I think for me, something that I found is that it's so interesting. I've always thought I'm an empathetic person, but have actually going through, you know, childbirth and having children, I feel like I'm so much more empathetic, and I've realized that there's no one size fits all for women. You really just have to do what works for you, and the mental health of a mother is incredibly important, because I mean, you need to have that. You need to have like support for your mental health so that you can be, you know, a good mother to your child. So I think if I had any advice, it would just be, just do what feels, you know, good for you. I thought I was going to love breastfeeding. I thought I was, you know, going to want to have like this medication-free, you know, childbirths, and I was going to be like running around after and walking on clouds, and that didn't happen for me. And that's fine. I don't need to, just because I've, you know, been told and it gets drilled into you that like breast is best and that having a vaginal birth is best, just because you get told that, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the truth for you. Yeah, so I think, you know, for me, for example, this time around with my second child, I've decided that I'm going to start bottle feeding her soon. So I just wanted to do 3 months of breastfeeding. And then if I wasn't enjoying it, like I didn't enjoy it the first time around, then I'll start bottle feeding. And that's what I'm going to do this time, because I think for my mental health, that's something that will help me. And it will also mean that my husband can also share, you know, 50% of the feeding duties and things like that. And I can have just a little bit more independence. So I'm going to do that, you know, even though there's messages and I understand like broadly maybe breast is best, but for me it's not best. So I'm just going to make a choice, you know, for myself and my child. And the same with the second time around, that I made the choice to have a C-section, even though broadly, again, maybe an uncomplicated vaginal birth is the best thing, but for me, the C-section was the best thing for me. So I made those choices just based on my situation. I think that's what I would say to any other woman who, you know, is going through this, is that even though there's lots of messages that gets pushed your way and advice that gets pushed your way, just really do what you want to do, because that's the best thing you can do for your child.